But joining me in studio is the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa, Suleiman Ibrahim. So, good evening to you. It's great to have you. Now, you're not too happy about the kind of reportage put out there by some other media houses about it. What exactly is your concern?
Well, I looked at the headlines in today's dailies and those as put out by some of the prominent online news portals. I don't want to name names. And I realized that the twist that was given, or the framing of the particular incident, is something that I would say was quite insensitive.
If you could just recall some of the ones that were, you know, and
so
how it had been
for example, there was a headline that says ethnic clash leaves 2 dead. Another one said Konkombas and Dagombas in a fierce clash or something like that. There were several others that, you know, used this same headline, Kokombes, Dagombes, in a violent clash, 2 dead, and so on and so forth. And I think that as journalists and as media practitioners, we should always be mindful when issues that are sensitive, like what happened yesterday, come up, and how we frame it. I keep asking myself, for example, if this had happened at, let's say, Abosokai, where a group of Ashantis had, maybe as a result of some confusion, entered a shop owned by a Kwewu man, and then there was a confrontation, would we end up saying this is an ethnic clash between Ashantis and Kwewus? Or are we talking of this way because of the background that we know?
Then that's the point I was trying to just come to, because there's a trend, there is an undercurrent, there's history to this. And so how would you expect the media to report it without having not to refer to the history, the trend that we know exists in that area?
I think the knowledge about the trend and the history that we know should even be the reason why we must be very, very careful and cautious about how we frame what happened yesterday. If we know that, look, there are undercurrents, I don't think that there would have been a problem if, for example, the headlines or the framing was violent clashes, you know, at Agbogbloshie leaves 2 dead, or 2 groups, you know, in violent clashes,
leaving the ethnic groups out, or
exactly.
The
and then in the story, some, you know, reference could be made that information gathered indicates that maybe the clash was between persons believed to belong to this group or that group, and given this scenario and the history that we know, you know, it's important that investigations are swiftly conducted so that we don't have repercussions back home where these people come from. And I think that sensitivity ought to have been reflected in the story. And reading all the stories that I have read, it's quite clear that the journalists were not on the scene as the incident was happening, but then relied on either eyewitnesses or the police accounts or persons affected by the situation who would have given the accounts, you know, in a manner that favors their side. And therefore, the media ought to have been very, very careful and very sensitive in the way they framed this particular issue. Because I ask myself, if you say Kokombes and Dagombes clash, 2 dead, immediately, you know, you are talking about an issue that relates to, that brings into focus the whole issue of we versus them. And definitely you would have people back home in the north thinking of it, oh, what could have happened, calling desperately to find out. And given the history and the undercurrent that we all know, we ought to have been very, very sensitive and professional about the way we
would expect that we approach this as being more of an isolated case than generalizing it to mean that it involves 2 ethnic groups. But how do we do this without having to water down the facts of the issue? Because then again, you say you do not want it to be captured in the headline, but you want it to be captured in the story. But the material effect of capturing it either in the headline or the story is still the same.
Now, you see, even in the story, I talked about making reference to, you know, the issues in the past, and the fact that people are saying, look, this community is occupied by these 2 groups, and therefore it's important that investigations are swiftly conducted, so that you don't make that categorical statement that it is a clash between this group and that group. Because immediately you do that, you are raising, you know, tensions directly, not just here, but also the bigger groups back at home, the Kokombes and the Dagombes back at home. And I think that when we talk about public interest as an overriding something in journalism, whether, it's a journalist who has breached the law and therefore we look at whether or not the story had a public interest. In the same vein, sometimes, even in as much as you would want to look at the facts, you want to be very careful and very cautious and very sensitive because of the particularities of the issues and the fact that you also as a journalist have to be concerned about the public interest. And in this case, the public interest is about not highlighting this particular clash as an issue involving two ethnic groups. Because these are individuals. Some people say, well, these are criminals who decided to engage in a criminal act and therefore we must say it as it is, rather than categorizing it as an ethnic tension.
No, an isolated case.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sule.
Thank you very much.
Caution well taken.
Thank you for having me.
We want to contribute to maintaining the peace in the area and up north as well. Suleiman Abrahima is the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa.